Did you know that one of the first major disasters to be caught on live television was a shipwreck? The sinking of the Andrea Doria occupies a strange place in modern history, and it has very little to do with the scale of the tragedy or even the ship itself. It was a collective moment, when people witnessed a disaster in real time through moving images, broadcast into their homes while the event was still unfolding. So, what happened?
The Andrea Doria collided with the Stockholm in dense fog 12 miles off the coast of Nantucket.
The Italian ocean liner was heavily publicized as a symbol of post-war luxury and technological confidence when it left Italy on July 17, 1956. It was carrying over 1,700 people when it collided with the Stockholm. The impact was severe enough to cripple it, but not severe enough to sink it quickly. The delay created something entirely new. Not a disaster that happened and was later reported, but one that stayed unresolved long enough to become a shared, unfolding event. For nearly 11 hours after the collision, the Andrea Doria did not sink. It leaned sharply to starboard, taking on water unevenly, its lifeboats unusable on one side, forcing nearby ships to improvise a rescue in open ocean under heavy fog. News of the crash spread quickly. Radio bulletins moved first, then wire reports. By midnight, stations along the East Coast were interrupting programming, with updates about a luxury liner in trouble off the coast of Massachusetts.
History's first collision of two luxury liners set into motion the greatest maritime rescue operation, 45 miles south of Nantucket Island, Massachusetts, in the shipping lane known as the Times Square of the Atlantic.
In New York and Boston, editors realized something unusual. The ship was still afloat. That changed the calculus. Instead of waiting for photographs of the wreckage, they began organizing coverage of an event that was ongoing. Crews were alerted. Equipment was gathered. Boats were secured with one objective in mind: reach the scene before the story ended. The press was racing the clock and each other to get there first. When confirmation came that the Andrea Doria was still afloat hours after the collision, editors of the three major TV networks recognized an opportunity that television had almost never encountered: a major catastrophe that was still ongoing in real time. Radio updates were already circulating along the East Coast, but television required something more than voice. Producers began assembling crews before midnight, not to summarize events, but to reach a scene that was still physically intact and potentially visible at first light. Reporters moved toward coastal docks in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, where chartered fishing boats and small vessels could take them into open water. Access was uncertain, and Coast Guard coordination was limited, so crews decided to move without formal clearance, calculating that hesitation would cost them position. The decision to move carried weight. Evacuations were still underway. Lifeboats were still transferring passengers in darkness, and yet network crews left shore, headed toward a ship that was already visibly compromised, choosing proximity over caution. Reporters arrived on the scene, not as commentators but as witnesses, their cameras lifting toward a ship still surrounded by Coast Guard crews and small boats, ferrying survivors away from its heavy list. Some survivors were taken to hotels and temporary lodging along the Massachusetts coast, where television sets and lobbies and common areas were tuned to the news coverage. Within hours of stepping off rescue vessels, they were watching the ocean liner they had just evacuated continue to sink into the Atlantic.
All vacations have to end eventually.
The camera did not linger on individual loss, but the implication was unavoidable. They were now reduced to being the background detail in a national broadcast. Several survivors later described the experience as deeply disorienting. They were no longer recounting what had happened. They were watching it unfold at the same pace as millions of viewers who had never set foot on the ship. That shift mattered. In previous maritime disasters, survivors carried the primary narrative once the event ended. Interviews and written accounts shaped public understanding after the fact. Here, the boundary between private survival and public spectacle narrowed in a way that had not existed before. The story did not wait for survivors to process it. It continued without them. By the time the Andrea Doria finally slipped beneath the surface on July 26, 1956, much of the audience had already watched its final hours unfold. And for the first time, a sinking ship was not only survived, it was consumed. And it would make journalism history. Photographer for the Boston Evening Traveler, Harry Trask, circled the scene in a plane at 75 feet, shooting with a 4x5 speed graphic camera. 9 minutes before the Andrea Doria disappeared, he took the image that would win the 1957 Pulitzer Prize for photography. The photographs appeared in Life magazine. The footage aired on networks across the country, and the coverage did not stay local. News of the sinking spread globally within hours, not through written accounts or delayed reporting, but through transmitted images and live updates. The press needed human faces to accompany the visual story, and they found them immediately. There was 14-year-old Linda Morgan, who was dubbed the Miracle Girl by reporters, after the collision threw her from the Andrea Doria onto the deck of the Stockholm. Celebrities like actress Ruth Roman provided ready-made narratives for the cameras. But one survivor would eventually become something different. 9-year-old Perrette Simpson survived the collision with her grandparents. Decades later, she became a filmmaker and author, producing documentaries about the disaster, turning her survival into storytelling. The press transformed the survivors into characters in an ongoing public narrative. They became part of a story they hadn't written and couldn't escape. Previous disaster survivors had time to process what happened before facing questions. These survivors were interviewed while still in shock, photographed while grieving, and recognized in public for years afterward, attached to this tragedy for the rest of their lives. So as the press won awards, the survivors were left carrying the weight of the disaster. And as for the Andrea Doria, her wreck would later make headlines again, and you'll never guess why. Because of this guy, Stockton Rush, the OceanGate CEO who died in 2023 when his submersible imploded on a trip to the Titanic wreck. Turns out, ignoring safety warnings on the Titan submersible was not the first mistake he made. Years earlier, he made his mark on the Andrea Doria, literally.
I don't think I like you.
After its sinking, the Andrea Doria's wreck site quickly became both legendary and lethal. The wreck sits at 250 feet, deep enough that the pressure and darkness turn routine dives into technical challenges. In 1969, cinematographer Al Giddings compared it to Mount Everest, and for wreck divers, the comparison was accurate. At least 16 divers have died attempting to reach it, and not all for the same reason. The depth itself causes disorientation, severe enough that divers lose their sense of direction entirely, making decisions that would seem irrational at the surface. Inside the wreck, hallways have collapsed as the structure deteriorates, creating internal mazes, where silt heavily clouds the water the moment it's disturbed. Divers have been found dead within the wreck, like Richard Roost, a highly experienced diver who was discovered in what remained of the first-class bar. Others never make it back to the surface, dying on the way up, or soon after they reach it. The wreck has been collapsing steadily since it sank, and it remains one of the most dangerous dive sites in the world. In June 2016, OceanGate brought their Cyclops 1 submersible to the Andrea Doria, the first time anyone had used a submersible to dive the wreck in 20 years. Stockton Rush piloted the expedition. During one of the dives, Rush crashed the submersible directly into the port side of the bow at full speed, causing documented damage to the historic wreck. Some of the passengers aboard dispute how severe the incident was. 7 years later, Rush died when OceanGate's Titan submersible imploded during a dive to the Titanic, killing all 5 people aboard. During the Coast Guard investigation into the Titan disaster, David Lockridge, OceanGate's former director of marine operations, testified under oath about what had happened at the Andrea Doria. According to his account, Rush went straight down and drove at full speed into the wreck.
Don't tell me what to do. That was the conversation. He decided to go straight for the wreck. He came straight down, hard on the bottom. No trimming, no ballast, nothing. Smash straight down on the bottom. Unbeknownst to everybody else, and I don't know why, he decided to turn the submersible 180 degrees at speed, and he basically drove at full speed into the port side of the bow, and we could hear the cracking of the fairing as he got us jammed in underneath.
The testimony revealed the pattern. Rush's carelessness at the Andrea Doria in 2016 foreshadowed the same recklessness that killed him at the Titanic. And as for the Andrea Doria itself, she remained exactly where the story began, in front of cameras, under scrutiny, still generating headlines nearly 70 years after it sank. From the moment it struck the Stockholm in 1956, the attention never really went away. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share, and let us know in the comments what shipwrecks you want us to cover next. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. And until next time, keep exploring.